A warm welcome to everyone for our PCQuest 35 years journey from 1987 to 2022. Today, we will be discussing how cybercafes helped popularize the internet in India. We have no one better to discuss this with us in the form of the stalwart, Mr. R. Ramaraj, founder of Satyam Infoway, which became Sify Technologies Limited. Welcome.
Thank you, Sunil.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So actually, through this series, we're taking a trip down memory lane. So we're just wondering, can you take us back to the 1995-96 period? What was India like then? What was the atmosphere when the internet came to India? I mean, 93-94, we had just liberalized, but and even the PCs had not taken, that off. So what was the atmosphere like when the internet came, and how did people react to the internet initially?
So just to set it in context, most of us today don't realize what it was back then. So the first thing was, there was one provider of internet, VSNL, Videsh Sanchar, a government company at that time. And what you did was you took out a demand draft, again, a strange thing today, I think, for most people, sent it to them. And after about 2 weeks, they would let you know whether you could get a connection or not. At which time, in some way, some email started. And then some of us got together and went to the government and said, how about allowing us to start providing the internet? And they said, no, you don't need this. There is an X400 and an X25 computer network and protocols. Whatever you do, as long as it is X400 and X25, it's okay. But you can do TCP/IP, but not at the edges. We said, doesn't make sense. So they didn't allow. So we actually had to create an association of email and internet wannabe providers. Fortunately, Montek Singh Alwalia was then head of the Planning Commission, as it was called. And he, when we met and spoke to him, finally agreed on saying, hey, this makes sense, and came up with a very liberal policy sometime in 97, where he said the internet can do everything because nobody knew its potential, and only limited voice because there was already the voice providers, analog voice providers. So therefore, the internet policy that finally got announced in 97 said you can do anything on the internet except provide voice. And like everything else the government does, from zero, I think they issued 500 licenses. So suddenly there was serious competition and scrambling to launch. So that is the starting point of how the internet policy came. And then, of course, everybody has been meddling around with it to make it inefficient for a standalone ISP provider to survive. Once we got the license is when suddenly we realized that companies had computers. Most people at home didn't have computers. About 10 lakh computers were getting sold in a year at that time. Most of it went to companies and businesses. What would you do with a standalone computer at home? So some who got it more hoping that their child's future is protected because you do something with a computer. More FOMO than anything else. And so some had, but very little use. And we launched, and then we also at Sify went and listed on NASDAQ in 99. And not yet Y2K. So 99 October, listed, second company from India to list, Infosys being the first internet company. So all those are, it's another story. But there we spoke about taking the internet to the people as one of the ways in which we will open out, because in China, Korea, the great wave was cybercafes. In India, there was already the PCO, because again, telephones, there were only 42 million landlines. And that was the phone. We all know we had to use our neighbor's telephone half the time. So PCO, 60 lakh PCOs were there. And so people were used to going out to connect to the phone in some way. And the internet was being connected from homes and businesses to an extent through dial-up. And so we said, let us launch cybercafes, but try and put slightly higher speed. 64K was quite a high speed. So from there, how to give higher speed, not give dial-up. So how do you create wireless line of sight connection? Last mile, you know, in India can be a huge challenge in most things, distribution. So how to get that last mile connectivity, how to find line of sight, how to get kids to come to your cyber cafe, because parents were saying, what are you going there for? And so we had to show that we were going to teach them about computers, about the use of the internet. So all about education. Incidentally, half the time you spent on games and fun and all that. But we actually had to sell to the parents courseware for children to come and use the internet in these cafes. I'll talk about the cafes, but first is to get people, and then very quickly, because these were fast connections relative to anything else that was there, people who came suddenly became day traders, would come and use the place. Traveling salespeople would use this place. So it became a nice business for a small, enterprise. You had a few hundred square feet. You didn't know what to do with it. You had a niece or nephew you wanted to put into high tech, then cyber cafe, and so there. So Sify rolled out 5,000 cyber cafes in 18 months and franchised. Of course, we had to set up Sify's own to begin with, to show people how it is to be done. Learning from the likes of McDonald's that you needed to standardize cookie cut. So everything, whether it was a 2-seater or a 20-seater, it would be all, completely cookie cut. Everything standardized, central supplies would come and you could set it up in 4 weeks, because the longest delay would be computer delivery. And so very quickly, making sure that it was somewhere we would help get footfalls and make it viable. So 5,000 cyber cafes in 18 months. I think it was done. And that's how the people started realizing the power of the internet. And then, of course, the mobile phone came, and thank you very much. So
I was just thinking that means, like you said, it was like many people took because of FOMO, and even the PC penetration was more in offices. So, I mean, is it safe to say that had the cyber cafes not been there, then it would have been very tough for the internet to gain penetration? And one thing I like, because you said first people started using it, then day traders and all. So basically cyber cafes, we think with fun and surfing, but it was also a serious business venture. So from that point of view, what is the role of cyber cafes?
So cyber cafes actually, like the telephone, PCO. PCO, family using PCO for some emergencies only when you're traveling. it was truly a business opportunity where people came and made quick calls, business calls, lightning calls, as they were called, urgent, lightning, all those terms which we don't know today, all there. Similarly, this was actually a business enterprise. In China and Korea, where it was more entertainment focused, it would start with a snack counter. Kids would come straight from school to a cyber cafe, play till they collapsed almost. So their food and drinks and like colas and all that were part of what was needed. Here, we would not allow any food inside because, the way in which it is, it could become a mess, and hygiene and rats and all that kind of stuff. So actually there was no food even allowed. And so it was more serious. Where as games evolved, especially the multiplayer games evolved, then set up gaming cafes where there were 20, 30, 50, where kids could come play against each other in the cafe, across the city, and then of course across the world. So that decor, the 6 screens, all of that very different from these 5,000, which were, I would think, 90% business oriented.
That's pretty high. So basically, you played a role in what the industries, the internet industries that followed. You can say that.
I don't think people, there are 2-3 challenges that came up. One, people didn't know what you could do with it, whether it is kids or business or anybody. And in India, as soon as people get exposure, then their imagination takes over. They do many things that we don't even think of. So just that introduction was good enough. Even with the children, as soon as they got to know it, they would do wonders with it. So the exposure, and therefore, whether it is small business, kids, anybody. Then we found staffing of these 5,000 cafes, we actually had to train kids to run these cafes. Because when somebody came in, how do you log in? What do you do after you log in? So all of that, even though there were tutorials, etc., but I don't even know where to start. So actually ran a program where we trained school dropouts. Went to some NGOs, picked up school dropouts in different locations, trained those kids to become cyber cafe instructors. Just to show what to do on this and get the kids and anybody else who came in excited about the usage of it. So staffing it, all of that had to be done. It was evangelizing in a way, because many a time you're slightly ahead of the curve in some of this. The first cellular phones were bricks, if you remember. You didn't feel like carrying it around. And look at where it is today. So, yeah.
So actually, I'm very fascinated about these 5,000 highways that you had. Like even personally, my parents settled in a place called Akola, which is a small town. And I remember there was a swank highway there also, and I used to go there. So, how was it, the logistic? What was the distribution like? Did cities, or did you go to B towns, C towns? And again, what was the mix, gaming, business, pleasure? If you can just give me an overview of just those 5,000. It'll be a fascinating snapshot. Yeah.
So, of course, we started with the metros, though the penetration of computers was a little better in some of the larger metros relative to anywhere else in the country. And then we found that the appetite was as much anywhere for people. And they were anyway having challenges connecting, networking, anything like that. And so I would think tier 2, tier 3 must have been closer to 3,500 of the 5,000. And the reason being, there were people very happy to be franchisees. Small space is all that we are asking. We anyway had nodes that were there. Railtel, the electricity carriers all had cables, fiber running. And therefore, from there to be able to tap and create nodes and last mile connectivity became more practical. Otherwise, it would have been cost would have been prohibitive. So very quickly, we had about 50 to 70 nodes in the country from where we could provide the internet and backhaul the traffic. Majority people came first out of curiosity. What is this? Let me see, try it out. Quickly, businesses picked up. Traveling salesmen, of course, started picking it up. Small businesses. Kids came. And once they saw, parents saw there was a curriculum. So we actually had to work a curriculum for children to come. Once they came and then they saw the games and fun part of it, they spent. I would think half the time children would have spent on games. But overall, I would think that especially in tier 2, tier 3 towns, 75, 80% would have been business-like or curriculum, serious stuff. 25% would have been fun.
It's actually been 25 years of the cyber cafe in India. So if you look back, when would you say was the peak? When did the decline start? And today, is the culture still there, or would you say it's as good as dead? Because I do see cyber cafes dotted. They have not fully gone.
I'm told PCOs are still there too.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, they're still there, correct.
In 2005, there were 2 lakh cyber cafes in the country. I would think that might have been its peak. I'm told that there are maybe between 50 and 70,000 even today. Browsing centers mostly. I'm not taking gaming arcades at all into this because that's a different thing. Even though they may be connected to the internet, but that's very different from what I would call the highway kind of model. So there are between 50 and 70,000. I believe there is a cyber cafe association that is there still, looking after the interests of this small and medium enterprises, or small enterprises really. So 2005, we were a little over 2 lakh. Today, they're about 50 to 70,000.
I guess it's still there because while the mobile penetration has been there, the PC penetration still hasn't been there that much in the country.
That's true.
Yeah.
Plus, I think when you go there, you can take printouts, right, and a few other things that you may want, something to give to your passport office or something. Right. So you browse and additional services that you may want with it. That's how I know in and around Bangalore itself, I think there must be 1,000 or so. Because they do multiple services related.
Yeah. No, you're right. Cyber cafes are now like small business units. They cater to everything. So also, like before I conclude, I'd just like to know, how did the cyber cafes of India fare with the rest of the world? When you set up these, did you look at other countries, or there was enough material here? So how did you go about it?
I did go to South Korea. I went and met the gaming association there. At that time, they had 400 plus game companies in Seoul. Then went to China and looked at the multiplayer games that were there. At about 11 o'clock in the morning, we landed up at one of these game places on a working day. And there were 400,000 or 500,000 concurrent players that time. I believe nights and all that, it used to cross a couple of million quite easily those days. And I'm talking late 90s and maybe 2000, 2001 kind. But when in India, the difference was that we had good alternate entertainment. Our TV programs and a whole lot of other stuff that our kids had, our youngsters had, that gave them alternatives. So multiplaying, this role-playing MMORPG, as they used to call them, did not take off to this extent. And plus, every one of those associations told us that they have to be careful that the kids don't collapse at these gaming centers, because they're overexposed. They're just playing till they're exhausted. Luckily, none of those things, those extremes, we didn't even build for that. We didn't want to cater for that. And I don't think our kids were even motivated to come and spend time like that. So the design was a better quality PCO, a small business. And that was the thinking from day one. And for games separately, we created, larger foot format, 20, 50 stations. But again, in the right kind of screens and fun and all that. But the ones that the franchisees found the greatest return was the small business format. And like you said, whether it is Akola, some railway stations, ticket booking, ticket booking had come online. And where do you go for ticket booking? Train tickets, then flights. So small things, it was almost like what that CSS, as it was called, Computer Service Centers, or CSC, Computer Service Centers. This was almost like that, providing citizen services through small businesses.
So finally, before you go, I'd like to know about, the cyber cafes had a culture. They were part of a social group. And do you feel nostalgic? Do you think sad that we have lost a big chunk of our culture? At best, maybe at the coffee shops, which give free Wi-Fi. But, today the problem is browsing is a solo affair. So maybe something on the culture and social aspects. Do you feel nostalgic? How would you look at the last 25 years?
So I'm sure my parents, grandparents looked at us and said, these guys are come from some other planet. The way we dressed, the way we did things, we were alien to the much older generation. The thing is that technology transformation is, exponential generation to generation. And today, generation is, not 15, 20 years also. It's 3-5 years. There is enormous transformation that's taking place. So I'm not missing out. What I do miss is the fact that, like you said, one, we seem to be almost in this metaverse world. We seem to be heading to it. We are tigers on computers and the little cats, kittens maybe in the real world. Even in the way we respond, communicate, all of that, that I think is not a great thing to be in. I think we don't have that real exposure, and COVID hasn't done anything good to it either. Our ability to get along, communicate, socialize, all of that has come down. And that behavior amongst ourselves of getting along well with our neighbors equivalent, hanging around with friends, the adda, pada, all that kind of stuff that we talk about, having a cup of tea sitting under a tree, kind of, in a dhaba. All of that, maybe it's Starbucks today rather than under a tree, But I think that we are missing. And I hope that we will get back to that socializing, because this loneliness is a bit dangerous.
I think that that moment of hope, it's a good place to end. And I'd really thank you for taking me down this 25-year journey. Even I look at it nostalgically. Even I had started the internet through cyber cafes only. So it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, Sunil. Pleasure
Yeah.
for the opportunity.